The truth will always come out because we are not the master of the universe. God is.
Ain't that right? He ain't lying.
What's up, everyone? Welcome back to Alpha and Omega Exponent, where we share content to add value to your life. My name is Parfait, and we are continuing on our story time. The story time of today is the story about a man who heard from God and went out and took a step of faith to do the things that God commanded him to do at the age of 75 years old. This is the story of Genesis chapter 12. Without further ado, let's get started. In the beginning of the story, in verse 1, it begins and it says, "Now the Lord said to Abram, go out of your country and your kindred and your father's house to the land that I will show you." So, this is God speaking to a man named Abram, and God tells him to go out of his country, to go out of his father's house to a land that God himself will show him. In this short verse, what do we take away? What is the message to take away here? The first message is first to know that God is always speaking to us. It's just important for us to pay attention and to listen. It's only to our benefit when we are paying attention to what God is telling us to do. We see here in the same story in the beginning, it says that the Lord said to Abram. We have to know that there are things that God is saying to us, and we must pay attention to what are those things. And with that, to further on, there's an important question that we need to ask ourselves. And the question is, what has God spoken to you? Or what is something that God has put into your heart that you already know about it, that you haven't gone out and taken action to do it? Speaking specifically about me, for example, to start sharing these lessons on this page, it took a lot. But now this is kind of the story of it was something that God put into my heart, and then now it's being manifested where I'm able to share now these messages. And the same way with us in our life, there are things that God is saying to us. We must pay attention to what are those things now in order for us to go out and take action on those things. In verse 2 of the story, God is speaking to Abram again, and he said, "I will make you a great nation. I will bless you and make your name great so that you will be a blessing." What is the message that we take away in this verse? Before talking about the message of this verse, a little background about this story is that Abram was married to a woman named Sarai. And Sarai, as a woman, she was barren, meaning that she was not able to conceive. And God spoke to Abram, and God was telling Abram that I will make you a great nation, you will be a blessing, and all these things that God was speaking to Abram. Abram knew already that his wife was barren, but God was telling him something that was opposite to his reality. God was telling him that he will bless him. God was telling him that he will make his name, he will make him to a great nation. And so now the lesson that we take here is that even in the midst of physical limitations or physical challenges, God will continue to speak to us and use those limitations and challenges for his glory and honor to be manifested on earth. Even though, as we see in this story, that the wife of Abram, Sarai, she was barren, but God spoke to her husband Abram and told him that he will make him into a great nation. He will be a blessing for many generations. And so God was already preparing Abram for the future that he had planned for him, regardless of the physical reality and limitation that Abraham was experiencing with his wife in his marriage. And the second takeaway message of this verse here is that the order of how God speaks to us is also important. As we hear here is that at first God spoke to Abram and he told him to go out of his country, to go out of his father's house to a land that God himself will show him. And then God spoke to Abram about the blessing that he had for him. And so the order came First, God spoke about the command, and then God spoke about the promises and the blessing. And so this order is also important because that is also a way for us to see how God lines up or step forward. At first, God gives us a command, and once we obey that commands, then God will speak into us the promises and the blessings that He has for us. If at first we're not even able to obey the commands that God has for us, then it's going to be a challenge for God to speak to us about the promises and the blessing that He has for us. So this order of how God spoke to Abram is also a reflection of today, of how God continues to speak to us, where He first gives us His command, and in return we must go out and take action about that command, and then God will come back again and speak to us about the promises and the blessing that He has planned for us. Moving forward, in verse 3, God is speaking to Abram again, and He says to him, I will bless those who bless you, and him who dishonors you I will curse, and in you all the families of the earth shall be blessed. What is the message takeaway for us in this verse? It's very simple, and it is that sometimes we get our blessing by being people who are blessed and by blessing those who are blessed. As we saw here, God is speaking to Abram, and he told him that I will bless those who bless you and dishonor those who curse you. So when we find ourselves around people who are blessed, in order for us to also be blessed, we must bless them. And it's important for us to have a heart that does not cast curse on others, because if we cast a curse on someone who's blessed, then we're only doing a bad favor on our life. It's important for us to also evaluate our environment. Are we surrounded by people who are blessed? And this is a question that we need to ask ourselves, especially as young people, is that do we hang out with people who are blessed, or do we hang out with people who bring destruction and division into our life? And meaning that, are you around people who are doing the commands of God? That is really kind of the first element to see how who are the people around us who are blessed. And the people who are around us who are blessed are the people who are doing the commands of God, because you see the fruits of the blessings of God manifesting itself in their life. And also, it's important to know that when we have friends who are blessed, we must continue to bless those friends by speaking words of blessing, words of prosperity, words of growth into their life, so that in return God will bless us. But if we have friends who are blessed, but instead of us continue to speak word of blessings into their life, we become jealous, then we are preventing our own blessings. Then God will not bless us because of our jealousy, and our own jealousy will prevent us from receiving the blessings of God, the blessing that is connected to the people who are around us and to the people who are with us. Moving forward, in verse 4 of the story, it says, so Abram went as the Lord had told him, and Lot went with him. Abram was 75 years old when he departed from Haran. So at the age of 75 years old, Abram decided to leave his country, to leave his father's house, to go out and take a step of faith, to do the things that God told him to do, to go to the land that God Himself will show him. So what is the message for us that we take away in this verse? The first lesson is that this story and the step of faith that this man at the age of 75 years old decided to do is a true example of putting God's word, of putting God's command into action through faith, regardless of the uncertainty, regardless of the unknown, regardless of the physical limitations. How many people today at the age of 75 years old will go out and take a step of faith based on something that God has put into their heart to do? At the age of 75 years old, most people are thinking retirement. Most people are already even retired. Most people are just, enjoying life and waiting for the next, basically, chapter of their life, which is basically the end. And so This man at the age of 75 years old decided to take a step of faith because God told him to go out of his father's house, because God said he will make him into a great nation. He will make his name great and he will bless him. So this man took a step of faith and left his whole country. So this is really a true example to encourage us. When God tells us something, we must act out of faith and not out of fear. The other takeaway message in this verse is that it's never too late to do the commands of God. It's never too late to take action on the things that God has put into our heart, and you are never too old to put into action the things that God is speaking to you. As long as you're still on this earth, as long as you're breathing, you have an opportunity. We all have an opportunity to go out and to put into action the things that God is putting into our heart. So this is to also encourage us to be able to continue to move forward. As long as God is continuing to speak to us, then we have an opportunity to go out and take action out of faith and not out of fear. And it will never be too late as long as we're breathing on this earth, and as long as we have the physical capability to do something, then we're always able to go out and do something. Moving forward in the story, after Abram left his father's house, he found himself in a land where there was famine. So because there was famine, Abram decided to go to Egypt because there was food there. And so in verse 11, this is we hear what happened on the way to Egypt and what they did as the outcome of the famine. And in verse 11, it begins and it says, "When he was about to enter Egypt, he said to Sarah his wife, 'I know that you are a woman beautiful in appearance, and when the Egyptians see you, they will say, "This is his wife." Then they will kill me, but they will let you live. Say you are my sister, that it may go well with me because of you, that my life may be spared for your sake.'" So, on the way to Egypt, Abram knew that his wife was fine. Abram knew that his wife was very beautiful. And he was like, once we come up on this place, and if these Egyptians sees you and they know that you are my wife, then they're going to kill me because you're very beautiful, because you're very fine. Say that, and he told his wife to say that she's his sister so that they're not going to kill him. But God had a different plan. And so as Abram predicted, when they entered Egypt, they were separated. The guards of the Pharaoh in Egypt saw Sarai and they were like, "Oh, this woman is pretty. This woman is very beautiful. She's fine." They took her into Pharaoh's house and they separated her from her husband, Abram. And then in verse 17, something else transpired. And here, God had a different plan. And in verse 17, he says, "But the Lord afflicted Pharaoh and his house with great plagues because of Sarai, Abram's wife. So Pharaoh called Abram and said, 'What is this you have done to me? Why did you not tell me that she was your wife? Why did you say she's my sister, so that I took her for my wife? Now then, here is your wife. Take her and go.' And Pharaoh gave men orders concerning him, and they sent him away with his wife and all that he had." So, after Abram told his wife Sarai to pretend to be his sister, God had a different plan. God afflicted Pharaoh and his house with a great plague. And after Pharaoh discovered that Sarai was Abram's wife, he called him and said, "What is this that you have done to me?" And he decided to send them away. So God had a different plan. And so what is the message for us to take away in this verse, in this story, is that the truth will always come out, because we are not the master of the universe. God is. So we should not lie because of fear, but instead we should always tell the truth for the sake of building courage and for the sake of building strength. So what are the key takeaway lessons and messages for us based on this story? The first one is that God's commands and blessings comes as a package. When God gives us his commands, Following his commands comes his promises and his blessings. So we must be able to first hear what are the commands of God for our life in order for God to then speak to us what are his promises and blessings for our life. Secondly, is that we must take action when we hear from God, because the commands of God is connected to our purpose and to our blessings. The third one is that our faith grows from what we hear. So we must first hear from God, because everyone else will bring to us doubts and fear. As we heard in his story, Abram heard first from God. And so it's important for us to hear from God first and then to take action. The fourth key takeaway lesson is that we must put God's command into action, because that is how we fulfill our purpose. We fulfill our purpose by doing the commands of God. The fifth takeaway lesson in the story is that we must bless those who are blessed, so that in return God will bless us. When we are surrounded by people who are blessed, it's important for us to speak word of blessing into their life, so that in return God will bless us, so that in return God will bring goodness, God will bring abundance upon our life as well. And the sixth key takeaway lesson is that we must surround ourselves with people who are blessed. And it's important to not become jealous when the people who are around us are blessed, because when we become jealous, then we prevent the blessings of God to fall upon our life. And the last key takeaway lesson in this story is that it's never too late and you are never too old to listen, to put into action, and to do the commands of God, the things that God is put into your heart. So as we heard in the story, that Abram was 75 years old when he decided to leave his country, when he decided to leave his father's house to do the things that God has spoken to him. And so we're never too old and it's never too late to do the commands of God. So that's it for the story time. I hope that the story here added value to your life. Share this video with someone who will benefit from it. Leave a comment based on some things that were said here, and subscribe to the channel, like the video, and I'll see you next time.